What would you do if, mid-flight, the person enforcing the rules wasn't protecting safety, but protecting their own prejudice on a transatlantic journey where billionaires, diplomats, and the most powerful voices in aviation sat side by side? One man boarded quietly, a man whose calm presence could shift the fate of an entire airline. His name, Malcolm Pierce. To some, just another passenger. To others, the co-owner of the very airline they were flying. When a confrontation erupted in the clouds, accusations, raised voices, cameras recording every move, Malcolm had a choice. Ignore it and let the culture of quiet discrimination keep flying under the radar, or stand up, mid-cabin, and draw a line that could not be crossed. But here's the question that will keep you strapped into your seat. Can one person's quiet strength change an entire company, or will the turbulence of old habits pull everyone back down? Buckle up. This isn't just a story about flying. It's about dignity, courage, and the price of change. 35,000 feet above the ground. If you're ready, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because the journey starts now. The cabin of first class on Flight 472 was unusually quiet for a departure from New York's JFK. A soft, golden light spilled through the oval windows, warming the polished walnut trim around each seat. The gentle hum of the air system mixed with the muted shuffle of passengers settling in for the overnight journey to London. Malcolm Pierce was already seated in 2A, angled toward the window. His tailored charcoal suit moved with quiet ease as he reached into his leather briefcase, retrieving a sleek tablet and a thin folder of documents. His long fingers flipped through a set of annotated pages. He looked like a man who could read the fine print of a billion-dollar deal and still remember the name of the janitor who cleaned his office. He had boarded without fuss, scanning his boarding pass, exchanging a polite greeting with the gate agent. Now, his focus was entirely on the upcoming negotiations in London, a merger that would ripple across the industry. But the stillness he carried would not remain undisturbed for long. From the far end of the aisle, the lead flight attendant, Karen Holt, stepped into the first-class cabin. Her posture was military straight, her lips pressed into a line that might have been mistaken for a smile if you weren't paying close attention. She scanned the passengers with the precise eye of someone inspecting for violations. When her gaze landed on Malcolm, it lingered. She approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the carpet. "Good evening, sir," she began, in a tone too sweet to be casual. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Malcolm looked up, mildly surprised. "Of course," he said, slipping the pass from the small leather holder in his breast pocket. He handed it to her without hesitation. Karen examined it longer than necessary, tilting it under the light as though looking for hidden flaws. "And, if you don't mind, I'll also need to see a secondary form of photo identification." A quiet pause hung between them. Malcolm's brow furrowed, not in anger, but in thought. "That's unusual," he said evenly. "You've already scanned my boarding pass. Is there an issue?" Her eyes didn't waver. "It's just a standard verification. We like to make sure all passengers in our premium cabins are properly documented. It keeps the experience consistent." The word consistent landed oddly. Malcolm heard what wasn't being said. Around him, a few passengers looked up from their champagne flutes, sensing something off. He considered asking if she was requesting the same from the other passengers in first class, but decided against it for now. Instead, He reached into his wallet and produced his driver's license. Karen took it between two fingers. Glancing between the ID photo and his face, she nodded slowly, but didn't hand it back. "Do you have another passport?" Perhaps Malcolm's lips tightened just slightly. "Why would you need another?" Her answer came too quickly. "We've had issues before. It's policy." He had been on enough flights to know when he was being singled out. Still, he kept his voice low and calm. "I travel often, Ms. Holt. This is the first I've heard of that policy." Karen's smile was brittle. Policies change. Behind her, Sophia Alvarez, one of the younger flight attendants, lingered by the galley curtain. She watched the exchange with a flicker of unease in her eyes. Karen held Malcolm's license for a moment longer before placing it on the armrest. "If you can't produce a second form of photo ID, I may have to ask you to relocate to premium economy until we can verify your credentials with the captain." The words landed heavier than the low thrum of the engines. Malcolm didn't move. He studied her face, measuring the conviction behind her stare. Around them, the subtle sounds of a luxury cabin, the clink of glassware, the whisper of coat fabric faded into a background of silent tension. A businessman across the aisle pretended to check his phone, but his camera was angled just enough to capture video. Malcolm spoke evenly. "That's a serious step to take over a supposed policy you can't cite." Karen didn't flinch. "Sir, I'm trying to handle this discreetly. Cooperation is appreciated." In his mind, Malcolm weighed the options. He could comply, dig out his passport from his briefcase, hand it over, and let the insult slide into the night like so many others before it. He'd done that in the past, swallowed the bitterness, focused on the work ahead, told himself it wasn't worth the disruption, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about him. It was about the quiet young attendant watching from the galley, about the passengers recording in secrecy, about the invisible line between service and suspicion that too many crossed without consequence. He reached slowly for the briefcase beside his seat. Karen's eyes followed the motion, expecting to see a passport emerge. Instead, Malcolm rested his hand lightly on the latch, pausing. He looked up at her. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice calm but edged with something colder. "That this is how you want to begin our flight?" For a moment, there was no answer. Karen's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The air felt heavier. Somewhere in the galley, the coffee machine clicked to life. Sophia shifted her weight, almost stepping forward, but stopped herself. She glanced toward Bryce Ellison, the cabin manager, who had just stepped into first class. He took in the scene with a narrowed gaze. Karen broke the silence. "Mr. Ellison, can you please assist here? Passenger in 2A is unable to provide proper identification." The phrasing "unable to provide" hit Malcolm like a challenge. He leaned back in his seat, hands resting on the folder in his lap. He said nothing yet, but his decision had already crystallized in his mind. He wasn't going to move, and he wasn't going to let this pass. Bryce Ellison stepped forward with the smooth confidence of someone who believed his presence alone could resolve any disagreement. His pressed navy blazer and silver tie clip caught the light as he glanced down at Malcolm. "Good evening, sir," Bryce said, his voice carrying that overly polite edge that never quite reached the eyes. "Karen tells me you're having trouble producing the proper identification for this cabin." Malcolm's gaze lifted from the folder in his lap. "I've already provided my boarding pass and my driver's license. That's standard, isn't it?" Bryce gave a slow, deliberate nod. Ordinarily, yes. But from time to time, we require additional verification to ensure the integrity of the first-class experience. There it was again, that phrase. First-class experience. Malcolm thought about the subtle weight those words carried, how they seemed to be less about service and more about exclusion. He kept his tone level. And you've applied this requirement to how many other passengers on this flight? Bryce's eyes flicked to the side, avoiding the question. We handled these matters privately. Sir, Malcolm leaned back slightly. Then you won't mind telling me the specific regulation you're enforcing. Bryce smiled thinly, the kind of smile meant to end a conversation. It's an internal policy, not something in the public guidelines. From the galley. Sofia Alvarez lingered just out of direct sight, pretending to tidy a stack of menus. Her ears were tuned to every word. She had been with Aureus Air for 2 years and had never once been instructed to ask for a second ID without cause. Bryce continued. Here's the situation. If you're unable to provide the documentation now, we can reseat you in premium economy until the captain confirms your identity. Once that's resolved, we can return you to your original seat. A few heads in nearby seats turned more openly now. A middle-aged woman in 3C shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the attendants and Malcolm. A younger man in 1B was definitely recording, his phone angled just above his tray table. Malcolm folded his hands over the folder in his lap. His voice was quiet but clear. And if I declined to move, Bryce's expression hardened just enough to be noticed. Then we'll have to escalate. That could delay departure for everyone. It was a tactic Malcolm recognized turning the cabin's patience against him, making it seem as though he was the one causing trouble. He took a measured breath. He'd been in boardrooms where billions were at stake and tempers ran hot. This was the same game in miniature. Control the frame, and you control the outcome. Inside. He felt a flicker of anger, not for himself, but for every traveler who had been quietly pushed aside, made to feel they didn't belong. He imagined the younger version of himself, fresh out of school, scraping together money for a single upgrade, only to be told the seat wasn't really his. Bryce's voice broke through his thoughts. Sir, I'm asking you one last time, will you produce a second form of identification? Malcolm's answer came slow. No, I've already met the requirements you ask of every other passenger. I'm not going to jump through hoops you've set up just for me. Bryce straightened. Then I'll need to involve the captain. He reached for his radio, murmuring into the mouthpiece. Karen remained at Bryce's shoulder, arms folded. You know, she said, her voice just loud enough for the row behind to hear, in my experience, passengers who refuse simple requests often have something to hide. The comment wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation for judgment. A subtle poison slipped into the air. Malcolm looked at her steadily, and in my experience, people who say that usually don't like being proven wrong. Karen's nostrils flared, but she didn't respond. From the galley, Sophia's grip on the stack of menus tightened. She wanted to step in, to say something, anything, but the unspoken rule among junior attendants was clear. Don't challenge your seniors in front of passengers. Her heart pounded with the unfairness of it. 2 minutes passed in tense silence. Bryce received a short reply on his radio, nodded to himself, then faced Malcolm again. The captain suggests we resolve this on the ground. If you can't comply with our request, we'll have to delay departure until the matter is settled. Malcolm smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "So, to be clear, you're telling me the entire flight will wait because I won't give you something you have no right to demand?" Bryce didn't answer directly. "We just want to make sure everyone here is who they say they are." That was the moment Malcolm knew there was no misinterpretation. This wasn't about security. It wasn't about procedure. It was about him and the quiet calculation that he wouldn't push back. He glanced out the window at the floodlit tarmac, the refueling truck pulling away. They were minutes from pushback, the aircraft humming with readiness. His hand rested on the folder again, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. Inside was the kind of leverage most people never dreamed of holding. He had intended to use it tomorrow in a meeting room overlooking the Thames, but sometimes the arena chose you. He turned back to Bryce. "I'll give you one last chance to reconsider your approach." Bryce's brow furrowed. "Is that a threat?" Sir Malcolm's gaze was steady. "It's an opportunity." For a brief second, Bryce seemed unsure, glancing at Karen for reinforcement. She gave a small, sharp shake of her head. Whatever doubt he felt vanished under the armor of their shared authority. "All right," Bryce said. "Then we'll proceed as I've outlined." Malcolm nodded once, a motion so small it could have been mistaken for resignation. But inside, the decision had already been made. He would not wait until London. The confrontation they were inviting would happen here, on this plane, with this audience. Across the aisle, the man with the phone adjusted his angle slightly. Malcolm noticed. He wasn't going to tell him to stop. Some truths needed witnesses. The cabin felt tighter now, the air thicker. Somewhere toward the back of first class, a baby stirred in its bassinet, letting out a soft cry that was quickly soothed by its mother. The normal rhythms of boarding had vanished, replaced by a current of anticipation. Sophia stepped into the aisle, her voice pitched gently. "Mr. Pierce, can I get you some water while you wait?" Malcolm's eyes softened at her offer. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez, that would be nice." Bryce shot her a glance sharp enough to cut, but she ignored it, disappearing into the galley. Karen adjusted her scarf, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She was waiting for Malcolm to reach into his briefcase, to produce the passport that would end this standoff. But Malcolm Pierce had other plans. Bryce Ellison didn't move away after his last statement. He stayed planted in the aisle beside Karen, a presence meant to block the air, to box Malcolm Pierce in. Passengers around them sensed the standoff was stretching beyond the normal boundaries of boarding. The background soundtrack of boarding overhead bins slamming, seatbelts clicking had faded. Now there was only the hum of the ventilation system and the uneven breathing of those waiting for the next move. Malcolm sat still, his body relaxed but his eyes alert. He had seen this play before different stage, different actors, but the same plot. Authority asserting itself for no reason other than to prove it could. Karen spoke again, her tone crisp, as though rehearsed. "Mr. Pierce, the captain has confirmed that, without additional identification, you cannot remain in this seat. If you choose not to comply, we will need to disembark you before departure." Malcolm regarded her for a long moment. "And you're certain this is the decision you want to stand by?" Karen's lips thinned. "It's not a matter of what I want. It's policy." Sophia Alvarez returned from the galley, setting a glass of water on Malcolm's tray table with quiet care. He met her eyes briefly, and in that brief moment, she conveyed what she couldn't say out loud, I know this isn't right." Malcolm took a sip, the cool water giving him a moment to think. He could feel the phone cameras on him now. They weren't overt, but they were there, passengers leaning slightly into the aisle, pretending to check messages, each capturing their own version of the truth. He set the glass down and reached for his briefcase. Karen and Bryce both shifted, watching his hands. They expected to see a passport or perhaps another driver's license. Instead, Malcolm clicked open the latch and pulled out a thin, sealed leather folder. The rich brown leather caught the cabin's ambient light. He placed it on his lap and slowly flipped it open. Inside, beneath a protective sheet, lay a sheaf of documents bearing the logo of Arius Air and the embossed seal of a corporate law firm in London. Malcolm didn't look at them. Instead, he held the folder slightly open, then extended it toward Bryce. "Since you're so interested in documentation, perhaps you should read this." Bryce hesitated before taking it. His fingers brushed the leather, and for a brief second his confident expression faltered. He glanced down, scanning the first page. His eyes moved quickly, then slowed, his pupils dilating as comprehension set in. The document was a finalized acquisition agreement. As of tomorrow morning, Pierce & Co. Holdings would own a controlling 51% stake in Arius Air. The signatures of the outgoing board members were already inked in black. The ink on Malcolm's own signature was still fresh. Bryce's Adam's apple bobbed. He glanced at Karen, then back at the folder, as if hoping he had read it wrong. Karen, impatient, leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" Malcolm's voice was calm, almost conversational. "It's proof, Ms. Holt, that by this time tomorrow, I will not only be a passenger on your airline, I will be the majority owner." The words landed like a crack of thunder in the quiet cabin. Karen straightened abruptly, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "That's impossible." Malcolm didn't smile. "I assure you, it's not. You see, I've been negotiating this deal for months. Tonight, I plan to fly quietly to London to finalize some minor clauses. But given the way you've chosen to treat me, it seems the timing of this information should be moved up." Bryce closed the folder, holding it as though it might burn him. The man in 1B, still pretending to check his phone, was now grinning faintly at the scene unfolding. Karen's voice was sharper now, brittle. "Even if that were true, it doesn't change the fact that you haven't followed procedure." "Procedure," Malcolm repeated softly. "An interesting word, especially when it's invented on the spot." He turned slightly toward the aisle, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "Would anyone here care to confirm whether they were also asked for a second ID this evening?" There was a pause, then a couple of quiet no's from behind. Someone in the third row said clearly, "No, I wasn't." Karen's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Malcolm leaned back, his eyes on Bryce. "You have an opportunity here to make a different choice. I suggest you take it." Bryce glanced at Karen again, but she gave him a look that said she wasn't backing down. "Mr. Pierce," he began carefully, "if you are indeed acquiring the airline, then perhaps we should wait to discuss this matter privately." Malcolm shook his head. "No, we'll address it now, in front of the people who witnessed it." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone. With a few taps, he placed a call on speaker. The ringtone cut through the still air of the cabin before a deep voice answered. "Douglas Keating." The voice said, "Douglas." Malcolm said, "It's Malcolm Pierce. I'm calling from seat 2A on flight 472. We have a situation." There was a pause on the line. "Malcolm, I thought we were seeing you in London tomorrow." "That was the plan," Malcolm replied evenly. "But your staff here have decided I don't meet their standard for the first-class experience. They've asked me for unnecessary identification, threatened to move me, and implied I might be hiding something. I wanted you to hear it from me before you see the videos online." Douglas's voice sharpened. "Videos? Yes. Several passengers are recording right now." Malcolm's gaze swept briefly over the faces around him. "I believe you can imagine how this will look." On the other end of the line, there was a low exhale. "Put the staff member on the phone." Bryce hesitated, then took the phone. "Mr. Keaton, this isn't—" He stopped abruptly, listening. His eyes widened slightly, then darted toward Karen. Karen took a step back, as if suddenly uncertain. Bryce handed the phone back to Malcolm. Douglas's voice was clipped. "I'll have this handled immediately. Please sit tight." "Malcolm." Malcolm ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Bryce and Karen, his expression unreadable. "We'll see how quickly headquarters can act." For the next few minutes, there was a strange quiet. Passengers murmured softly to each other, glancing toward the front of the cabin. Sophia moved quietly down the aisle, offering drinks to those who seemed most on edge. Then, just as the last of the luggage was being stowed, two men in dark suits boarded the plane. They moved with purpose, flashing identification to the purser before stepping into first class. "Mr. Pierce," one of them said, inclining his head. "We've been asked to speak with you briefly." Malcolm nodded. "Of course." The man turned to Bryce and Karen. "You're both relieved of duty, effective immediately. Please gather your belongings and disembark." Karen's mouth opened in protest, but the man's steady gaze silenced her. Bryce looked as if he wanted to speak, then thought better of it. Without a word, they moved down the aisle, the eyes of the cabin following their every step. Malcolm watched them go, then reached for his glass of water. He took another sip, the tension in his shoulders loosening slightly. Across the aisle, the man in 1B put down his phone, the recording complete. Sophia approached, a genuine smile touching her lips now. "Anything else I can get you?" Mr. Pierce Malcolm returned the smile faintly. "No, thank you. You've done more than enough." She nodded, moving on, but Malcolm could see in her eyes the quiet relief that someone had finally pushed back. He turned toward the window as the plane began to push back from the gate. The night sky over New York glittered with city lights, and beyond them, the dark Atlantic waited. The confrontation was over, but something deeper had just begun. The aircraft eased away from the gate, its engines spooling with a smooth, powerful hum. The runway lights beyond the window stretched into lines, glowing softly against the dark expanse of the tarmac. But inside the first-class cabin, the air was still charged, as if the confrontation moments ago had left an invisible residue clinging to every surface. Passengers whispered in low tones. Some leaned toward each other, trying to piece together the details. A few avoided looking at Malcolm altogether, as though unsure how to address the man who had just shifted the balance of authority in their presence. Others, like the man in 1B, met his gaze with a faint nod of respect. Malcolm sat quietly, his tablet now resting on the folded leather folder in his lap. He had not reopened it. There was no need. Its contents had already done the work. Sofia Alvarez returned to his seat, placing a fresh glass of sparkling water on the tray. Compliments of the galley, she said softly. Malcolm looked up at her, his expression calm but carrying that same warmth he had shown her earlier. Thank you, Miss Alvarez. Her smile was genuine. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened before. That's not how things should be. Malcolm studied her for a moment. You didn't create the problem, but I saw you watching, and I saw you care. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to speak further, then decided against it. If you need anything during the flight, please let me know. She moved on, tending to other passengers, her movements lighter now without the shadow of Karen and Bryce over her shoulder. Malcolm took a sip of the sparkling water, feeling the bubbles rise and pop against his tongue. He let his gaze drift to the aisle, where the two security officers who had escorted Karen and Bryce off the plane were speaking quietly to the purser. From somewhere behind, a voice rose just loud enough to be heard. Is it true he owns the airline now? Another voice responded in a conspiratorial whisper. Tomorrow, majority stake. Malcolm allowed himself a quiet exhale. He hadn't intended to make the news mid-flight, but sometimes leverage worked best when it was immediate, visible, and undeniable. The purser, a composed woman in her early 50s, approached his seat. Mr. Pierce, she began, her tone careful but respectful. On behalf of Aureus Air, I'd like to apologize for the events prior to departure. Our captain has asked me to assure you that you will have the full support of the crew for the remainder of the flight. Malcolm inclined his head slightly. I appreciate that, and I trust the rest of your team will focus on making this a smooth journey for all passengers. Her eyes flickered with understanding. Absolutely. She hesitated before adding, May I ask, should we expect changes when you take ownership? Malcolm met her gaze evenly. Yes, but not the kind that punish people for doing their jobs well. She nodded once, as if reassured, and moved on. The seatbelt sign chimed, and the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway. The low rumble of the engines grew deeper, vibrating faintly through the cabin floor. Malcolm fastened his seatbelt, leaned back, and allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his eyelids, his mind wandered not to the deal paperwork or tomorrow's negotiations, but to a memory from 20 years earlier. He was 27, fresh into his first senior management role. It had been a domestic flight, Chicago to Dallas, and he had been upgraded at the gate. He'd taken his seat in first class, still wearing the department store suit he'd bought on credit. He could still remember the way the lead flight attendant had hovered over him, asking if he was sure he was in the right seat. He had laughed then, nervous and eager to please, digging out his boarding pass 3 times over. That night, he had told himself it was just bad luck, a misunderstanding, but it had stayed with him. Not as a wound, but as a quiet reminder that appearances could be challenged, dismissed, or undermined at any moment. The memory faded as the plane lined up with the runway, the engines roaring in earnest now. The acceleration pressed him back into his seat, the cabin lights dimming for takeoff. The city dropped away beneath them, a scatter of gold against the black canvas of night. At cruising altitude, the cabin lights came up softly. The purser announced the start of meal service, her voice smooth and steady. Malcolm unfolded his tray table, but his appetite was slow to follow. A man across the aisle leaned toward him. Mr. Pierce, I just wanted to say I saw what happened. You handled it. Well, Malcolm offered a small smile. Thank you. The man hesitated, then added, "It's not often you see someone stand their ground like that without raising their voice. Sometimes quiet does more damage than shouting," Malcolm said. The man chuckled softly. "I suppose that's true." As the conversation ended, Sophia reappeared, balancing a tray with the evening's appetizer course. She set it down with practiced ease. Chef's starter for tonight, smoked salmon with dill cream and lemon. Malcolm thanked her, noticing how she seemed more at ease now, her shoulders no longer taut with tension. Halfway through the meal service, Malcolm pulled his tablet closer and began scanning through the morning's briefings. He made a few notes in the margin of a contract draft, then paused, sensing a presence beside him. It was one of the security officers who had escorted Karen and Bryce off the plane. He leaned down, speaking low enough not to carry. "Mr. Pierce, will be filing an incident report as per protocol. Headquarters has already reached out to the captain. They'd like you to know that the matter will be handled discreetly, but decisively." Malcolm nodded. "Good. No one else on this crew should be made to feel what I did tonight." The officer's expression was firm. "Understood." He stepped back, moving toward the galley. As dessert plates were cleared, Malcolm noticed Sophia slowing at his row again. "You know," she said quietly, "when you spoke up, it mattered. Not just to you. People see more than you think." Malcolm studied her, understanding the courage it took to say even that much. "The most important changes start small," he said, "but they need someone to take the first step." She nodded, her eyes bright, then moved on. The rest of the flight unfolded without incident. Passengers settled into their films or reclined to sleep, the earlier tension melting into the steady rhythm of long-haul travel. But beneath the calm surface, a shift had taken place. People had seen authority challenged, and they had seen it fall. Malcolm closed his eyes again, but this time it wasn't to escape into memory. It was to prepare. Tomorrow in London, the signatures on the deal would become operational control, and with that control, he intended to make sure no passenger, no matter their appearance, their name, or their background, would face what he had faced tonight. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their progress over the Atlantic. Smooth air ahead. The words were routine, but the cabin heard them differently now. Authority could be steady without being oppressive. Malcolm sipped the last of his water, glanced at the dark horizon beyond the window, and let the thought settle this flight had been more than a trip across an ocean. It had been the beginning of something else entirely. The first thin line of morning stretched across the horizon, painting the edges of the sky with muted gold and pale lavender. Through the cabin windows, the sprawling lights of London shimmered below, fractured by the slow-moving Thames. The intercom chimed, and the purser's voice carried over the hush of the waking cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 5:47 a.m. Weather is clear, with a cool breeze from the east. We expect to be at the gate in about 25 minutes." Malcolm Pierce opened his eyes, rolling his shoulders to shake off the stiffness of the night flight. He'd dozed for only a couple of hours, his mind turning over the same thought again and again, how quickly a single moment could expose the fault lines in an entire system. Sophia Alvarez passed through the aisle one last time, collecting glasses and stray cups. When she reached Malcolm's row, she gave a small smile. "Sleep well." Malcolm shook his head faintly. "Enough to be functional. That's all I need." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "I hope you follow through with whatever you're going to do." "I intend to," he said. She nodded, moving on, but Malcolm noticed the way her expression carried something more relief mixed with hope. As the plane dipped toward the runway, Malcolm retrieved his leather folder and slid it into his briefcase. The weight of it felt heavier now, not because of the paper inside, but because of what it represented. This was no longer just an investment deal. The events of last night had turned it into a mandate. The wheels touched down with a deep, satisfying thud. Reverse thrusters roared, and the cabin swayed forward before settling back. A light scatter of applause broke out in the rear, quickly fading into the soft shuffle of passengers preparing to disembark. Malcolm remained seated as others reached for overhead bags. He had no interest in rushing to immigration lines. Instead, he glanced out the window at the sea of the service vehicles moving around the aircraft fuel trucks, baggage carts, and a single black sedan parked discreetly at the edge of the tarmac. The purser approached with a respectful incline of her head. "Mr. Pierce, your car is waiting at a private entrance. We've been instructed to escort you directly." "By whom?" Malcolm asked. "Mr. Keating's office," she replied. "He's already at the main terminal." Malcolm nodded once, slipping on his jacket. When the first-class cabin finally emptied, he rose and followed the purser through a discreet side door in the galley. A set of portable stairs led down to the tarmac, where the morning air was brisk and laced with jet fuel. The driver, a composed man in a dark suit, opened the car door without a word. Malcolm slid into the back seat, the smell of leather and faint cologne replacing the industrial scent outside. As they pulled away, the terminal buildings loomed in the distance, steel and glass catching the first rays of daylight. They stopped at a private executive lounge entrance. Waiting there was Douglas Keating, the CEO of Aureus Air, flanked by two aides. His suit was immaculate, but there were shadows under his eyes, signs of a man who had slept even less than Malcolm. "Malcolm," he said, extending his hand, "we need to talk." Malcolm shook it, noting the faint tremor in Douglas's grip. "I imagine you do." Inside the lounge, a small conference room had been cleared. A tray of coffee and tea sat untouched on the table. Douglas gestured for Malcolm to sit. "I saw the footage," Douglas began, lowering his voice. "It's already on 2 social feeds, and while it hasn't gone viral yet, it will. We need to contain this before the press makes it into a headline about systemic bias at Aureus." Malcolm leaned back slightly. "It's not just bias, Douglas. It's the culture that allows it. Last night wasn't the first time your staff decided someone didn't fit the image they had in mind." Douglas sighed. "I know, and I won't defend it. But the optics, Malcolm interrupted, "are exactly why we're here. You and your board wanted an infusion of capital and a partner who could steady the brand. That's me. But understand this, I didn't buy into Aureus Air just to watch the same behavior go unchecked. We're going to change it." Douglas rubbed his temples. "I'm not against change, Malcolm, but we have unions, legacy staff, protocols. We have authority," Malcolm countered. "An authority can set the tone. The same way Karen Holt set the tone for that cabin last night. People follow examples, good or bad." For a moment, Douglas said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly. "I'll back your reforms, but it has to be done carefully. No mass firings in the first month, no public witch hunts. If we're going to shift the culture, we'll do it in a way that strengthens the brand, not fractures it." Malcolm's gaze held steady. "Fine, but we start immediately. First step, passenger dignity protocols, non-negotiable. Douglas nodded reluctantly. Agreed. The meeting wound down with a few practical notes, media monitoring, internal memos, a closed-door review of the Karen Holt incident. As they stood, Douglas added, "The board will expect a formal statement at this afternoon's signing. You might want to prepare for questions." "I'm prepared," Malcolm said. Outside the lounge, the black sedan waited again, this time to take him to the law firm's offices in the financial district. The ride was quiet, the city just beginning to stir. Cyclists navigated the early traffic, delivery vans pulled up to cafes, and the Thames shimmered under a weak sun. Malcolm's phone buzzed. It was a message from Andre Whitman, his newly appointed director of passenger experience. "Saw the video. I know that look on your face. Call me when you land." He allowed himself a small smile. Andre had been through his own battles with gate agents and boarding policies before Malcolm recruited him. If anyone understood the stakes, it was Andre. By the time they reached the law firm, the city was fully awake. Malcolm stepped out, the cool air biting his cheeks, and strode through the revolving glass doors. The receptionist greeted him warmly and led him to a private boardroom where the final contracts waited. As he signed each document, his mind replayed Sophia's words from earlier. "I hope you follow through." He intended to, and he intended to make it so that people like her, not Karen Holt, would define the passenger experience going forward. When the last page was signed, the lead partner extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Pierce. As of now, you hold majority control of Aureus Air." Malcolm accepted the handshake, but his thoughts were already shifting ahead. Control meant responsibility. Responsibility meant using power not for show, but for change. As he left the building, flashes erupted from a small cluster of photographers who had caught wind of the deal. A reporter shouted a question about the incident on Flight 472. Malcolm paused on the steps. "Aureus Air is entering a new chapter," he said evenly. "Our goal is simple excellence without exclusion." Then he stepped into the waiting car, leaving the cameras behind. The glass walls of the Aureus Air headquarters in London reflected the gray morning sky. Malcolm Pierce stepped out of the elevator onto the 14th floor, where the newly appointed Director of Passenger Experience, Andre Whitman, was already waiting outside the conference room. Andre wore a fitted navy suit, but it was his expression, half grin, half readiness for battle, that struck Malcolm first. They clasped hands firmly. "Welcome to the Lion's Den," Andre said. Malcolm smirked faintly. "I've been in worse." They stepped inside. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Screens along the wall displayed live feeds from news channels. On two of them, the incident from Flight 472 was playing in short, looped clips, even muted. The footage carried the weight of embarrassment for the airline. Karen Holt's posture rigid, Bryce Ellison hovering, and Malcolm's calm, controlled presence as he revealed the acquisition papers. Andre tapped the screen remote. It's on 3 major outlets. Social media's running with it. Hashtags are already trending. Aureus Air, your first-class bias, and he paused, smirking. Pierce control. Malcolm sat at the head of the table, leaning forward. Then let's make sure they see more than a viral clip. We use this moment. Andre took a seat opposite. "I've got ideas. But first, how far are you willing to push in the first 90 days? Malcolm didn't hesitate. Far enough that they know the tone has changed. But not so far that we destabilize operations. We're not here to burn the house down. We're here to rebuild the foundation while people are still living in it. Andre's eyes lit with recognition. Right. Precision changes, visible enough for the public, deep enough for the staff to feel it in their day-to-day. Exactly. Malcolm glanced at the screen showing news anchors debating the clip. We start with dignity protocols, mandatory for all customer-facing staff, equal treatment, no exceptions, no discretionary harassment under the guise of policy. Andre nodded. I've already drafted a framework. We'll call it the Passenger First Standard, covers ID procedures, seating interactions, language guidelines, conflict de-escalation, and here's the kicker. Every single incident gets logged and reviewed at the director level. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Including you. Andre grinned. Especially me. If I can't follow the rules, no one else will take them seriously. There was a knock on the glass door. Sofia Alvarez stepped in, her uniform crisp despite having just come off a long-haul flight. She looked slightly surprised to see Malcolm and Andre together, but quickly composed herself. I wasn't sure I should come, she began. But, Mr. Whitman said you wanted crew input. Malcolm gestured for her to sit. You were there. You saw how it started. Tell us, what do we need to fix first? Sophia hesitated only a moment. Some crew members treat passengers like they're doing them a favor. Others go further. They have this mental checklist of who belongs in first class or business. If someone doesn't match it, wrong clothes, wrong accent, wrong skin, they start looking for reasons to make things harder. Andre gave a low whistle. That's exactly what I've been telling them for years. Malcolm's voice was calm, but there was steel under it. Then the checklist goes. We replace it with one question. Is this passenger following the actual rules? If yes, they get the service they paid for, period. Sophia's shoulders eased slightly. That would change a lot. Malcolm studied her. You spoke up in your own way during that flight. That takes backbone. Would you be willing to help us train others? Her eyes widened. You mean, as part of the program? Yes. Crew respond better when they see one of their own leading by example. I want you in the first wave of trainers. She blinked, then nodded slowly. I'll do it. Andre jotted a note. We'll get her temporary leave from flying to work on development. And, Malcolm, I've been thinking, what if we make the first training session public? Not the whole thing, but a short, polished video. Show the world we're not hiding this under a rug. Malcolm leaned back, considering, risky, but if we control the narrative, it could rebuild trust faster than silence. That's what I'm thinking. Andre said, we show a CEO who's not afraid to sit in the same room as frontline staff and talk about hard things. Malcolm's gaze drifted to the footage still looping on one of the muted screens. Karen's face froze mid-expression, captured forever in that moment of realization. Then, let's do it, and make sure the message's clear service without prejudice isn't a favor. It's the baseline. Sophia stood to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, she said softly. Whatever you do, don't let them think this is just about optics. They've seen that before. It fades. It has to stick this time. Malcolm gave a short nod. It will, after she left. Andre leaned forward. She's sharp. If we can find 10 more like her, this might actually work. Malcolm smiled faintly. We don't need 10. We need a few who set the example, and the rest will follow. They spent the next 2 hours mapping the first phase of reform's revised onboarding, retraining for all premium cabin staff, a new reporting channel for passengers, and direct accountability to Andre's office. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential loophole discussed. By the time they wrapped, the morning had shifted into early afternoon. Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from Douglas Keating Press, waiting in the atrium for signing ceremony. Ready? Malcolm slid the phone back into his pocket. Let's go remind them who they just partnered with. Downstairs, the atrium was filled with journalists, photographers, and a scattering of Aureus Air executives. The signing table was positioned in front of a massive company logo. Douglas stood waiting, his politician smile firmly in place. As Malcolm stepped into view, camera flashes erupted. The noise was a low hum of clicking shutters and murmured questions. Douglas leaned toward him. Keep it light. They're hungry for a soundbite. Malcolm shook his head slightly. They'll get something real. After the formal handshake and pen strokes for the cameras, a reporter called out, Mr. Pierce, how do you respond to those calling this a PR stunt after the Flight 472 incident? Malcolm faced the cameras directly. What happened on the Flight 472 wasn't a stunt, it was a problem that's existed in subtle and not-so-subtle ways for years. I didn't buy into Aureus Air to paper over those cracks. I bought in to fix them. We will deliver service without prejudice. That's not negotiable. Another voice shouted. And how soon will passengers see changes? Some will start today, Malcolm said. Others will take time. But this isn't a promise for the cameras. It's a commitment to every passenger who steps onto one of our planes. The questions kept coming, but Malcolm kept his answers measured, direct. By the time the press session ended, the shift in tone was undeniable. This was not a ceremonial figurehead. This was a leader with both the leverage and the will to act. As the crowd dispersed, Andre caught his eye from across the room. They didn't need to speak. The look they exchanged was enough. The work was just beginning. By the second week after the signing, the offices of Aureus Air felt different, but not in a way that most people could name. It wasn't about the decor or the policies pinned to the bulletin boards. It was in the way conversations stopped when Malcolm Pierce walked past. It was in the guarded looks traded between executives in glass-walled conference rooms. Change was coming, and not everyone wanted it. Malcolm was in his corner office overlooking the Thames, reviewing a list of proposed trainers for the new passenger first standard. He circled Sofia Alvarez's name in bold ink, then drew a check mark next to 4 others. Andre Whitman sat across from him, tapping a pen against his notepad. I've been hearing rumblings, Andre said. Some of the old guard are telling people this is just another PR sweep, that if they wait it out, the heat will fade. Malcolm set down his pen. Who's saying it? 2 regional cabin managers, maybe 3. And there's talk from the union rep that the retraining is insulting to experienced staff. Malcolm leaned back. We knew there'd be resistance. Question is, do we let them grumble or do we push back? Andre's grin was quick. I say we push. Before Malcolm could answer, his assistant knocked and stepped inside. Mr. Pierce, Mr. Keaton's on the line. He says it's urgent. Malcolm picked up the phone. Douglas. Douglas's voice was clipped. We have a problem. A senior crew member from your Flight 472 is talking to the press off the record, but we both know how that works. She's saying you staged the whole incident to justify the buyout. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Karen Holt. Yes, Douglas confirmed. She's telling anyone who will listen that you provoked her, that you used your position to humiliate her for leverage. Malcolm kept his voice even. I didn't need leverage. Douglas, I already had the deal. I know that. But perception matters. I'm sending you the interview clips. Handle it carefully if we go after her too hard. They'll say we're punishing whistleblowers. When the call ended, Malcolm opened the video file Douglas had sent. Karen's face filled the screen, her hair perfectly styled, her voice sweetened just enough to sound like the reasonable one. I've served this airline for over 30 years, she was saying. I've never been accused of bias until that night. He was aggressive subtle, but aggressive. I believe he wanted a confrontation. Andre leaned over Malcolm's shoulder. She's laying it on thick. Malcolm closed the laptop. She's not our problem anymore. The problem is the culture that lets people believe her without asking what really happened. Andre straightened. So we double down on the reform, and maybe we show a little teeth. Later that day, Malcolm met with Sophia in one of the training rooms. The space smelled faintly of fresh paint, the walls now lined with high-resolution photos of passengers from every walk of life. Above the images, bold text read, "Every seat, every story, same respect." Sophia glanced around. This looks different. In a good way. That's the point, Malcolm said. I want the training to feel like a reset, not a lecture. They spent an hour walking through the first day curriculum, refining scenarios and role-play exercises. Sophia stopped at one example in the script a premium passenger challenged over seating. This one, she said, it's almost exactly what happened to you. Exactly, Malcolm agreed. And that's why it stays. People need to see it for what it is, not a misunderstanding, but a bias trigger. We break it down, step by step, and show how it should be handled. By the end of the session, Sophia's confidence was clear. I can do this, she said. I can lead it. You will, Malcolm replied. That evening, Malcolm and Andre sat in the executive dining room, overlooking the city lights. The clink of cutlery from other tables was faint under the low hum of conversation. Andre leaned in. If Holt and her allies want to play media games, we can counter with results. Publicize the first training session. Invite a few journalists, not the ones looking for a scandal, the ones looking for proof of change. Malcolm considered it. It's risky. If the session stumbles, it'll be fuel for their side. Then it won't stumble, Andre said flatly. Malcolm's lips curved faintly. Set it up. 3 days later, the training room was prepared not just for staff, but for a small audience of invited press. Cameras were positioned discreetly at the back, their operators instructed to capture the atmosphere without intruding. Sophia stood at the front, her voice steady as she welcomed the first group of cabin crew. Some were young, fresh-faced and attentive. Others were older, arms crossed, skeptical. Malcolm took a seat at the side, not as the CEO, but as an observer. As Sophia guided the group through scenarios, he watched faces shift, some softening and understanding, others tightening in resistance. When the premium seating challenge scenario played out, a ripple of unease went through the room. Sophia paused, letting the silence stretch. This isn't about rules on paper. It's about how you make someone feel when they're following those rules. You can't take that back once it's broken. Malcolm saw two of the older crew exchange a glance. One scribbled something on her notepad. Progress, he thought, even if it's slow. After the session, a journalist approached Malcolm. Mr. Pierce, do you think one training program can really change a decades-old culture? Malcolm's answer was measured. No. One program won't change everything, but it can start a shift. And once the shift begins, it's harder for the old ways to survive. By that evening, the first articles appeared online. Headlines varied, some skeptical, some cautiously optimistic. But the image that spread the fastest was a candid shot of Malcolm listening intently in the back of the training room. Not speaking, just watching. It was a small thing, but it mattered. To the public, it suggested humility. To the staff, it signaled that this wasn't performative. He was here to see the change for himself. Still, not everyone was convinced. In the days that followed, a confidential memo landed on Malcolm's desk, leaked to him by an anonymous staffer. It was from a group of senior cabin managers, urging colleagues to stay the course and remember our traditions despite temporary corporate fads. Malcolm read it twice, then slid it across to Andre. Andre's jaw tightened. They're organizing. Good, Malcolm said. Now we know exactly who to watch. The war for Arius Air's culture had only just begun. The sky over Paris was a watercolor wash of pale blue and soft gold when Malcolm Pierce stepped off the jet bridge and into the private terminal. Today was no ordinary flight. Arius Air had invited a high-profile delegation of business leaders, journalists, and government representatives on a special experience flight to showcase its renewed commitment to passenger service. This was Douglas Keating's idea, a chance to prove to the world, and perhaps to himself, that the passenger-first standard was more than a press release. But Malcolm knew this flight would be a crucible. It was one thing to talk about reform in a conference room. It was another to apply it in the unpredictable, high-pressure reality of an aircraft in motion. Andre Whitman met him at the lounge entrance, carrying a slim folder. "Here's today's manifest," he said, handing it over. "We've got CEOs, a few international press heavyweights, and one very picky royal cousin who likes to push limits." Malcolm skimmed the list, and the crew, Andre's smile was tight. Mixed bag. Sofia Alvarez is leading the premium cabin. That's the good news. The bad news, 2 of the senior attendants are part of the stay the course crowd. I wanted to pull them, but Keating insisted we keep it balanced. Said he didn't want it to look like we were stacking the deck. Malcolm folded the manifest. Balanced is fine, as long as they understand the new standard is non-negotiable. Boarding began an hour later. Cameras clicked as guests stepped into the first-class cabin, greeted with champagne and warm smiles. Sophia moved among them with the ease of someone born for the role reading body language, anticipating needs before they were voiced. 2 rows back, however, Malcolm caught the first hint of trouble. One of the senior attendants, Helen Draycott, stood stiffly as she inspected a passenger's boarding pass. The man, a Nigerian tech entrepreneur named Ayo Adekunle, was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, but Helen's eyes flicked over him with a faint squint of skepticism. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers," she said. Her tone politely sharp. Ayo gave a polite smile. "Yes, I am in 1A. Helen hesitated just long enough to make the moment noticeable, then scanned his pass again before stepping aside. Malcolm's jaw tightened. The entire exchange was unnecessary and dangerous in a cabin with journalists watching. He rose from his seat and intercepted Helen near the galley. "A word," he said quietly. Her expression froze. "Mr. Pierce, I saw what just happened," he said, keeping his voice even. "That's exactly the kind of interaction we're here to change. Was there any irregularity with his ticket? No, but then you move him through without friction. No hesitation, no second pass at the scanner. Respect is not conditional. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line. Understood. Back in his seat, Malcolm watched as Ao settled in, unbothered on the surface but noticeably more reserved than when he'd boarded. Sophia passed him a drink and said something that drew a smile. But Malcolm knew the damage was done. Once airborne, the atmosphere settled into the rhythm of a long-haul flight. Meals were served, lights dimmed, and conversation hummed low in the premium cabin. Malcolm kept a quiet eye on interactions, noting every subtle signal warmth, indifference, attentiveness, or the lack of it. Midway over the Atlantic, the royal cousin Andre had decided to test the limits. Prince Adrian of some tiny European principality pressed the call button and, when Sophia appeared, asked to have the seat next to him kept empty for privacy. Unfortunately, that seat was assigned to a journalist from the Globe. Sophia explained gently that the seat was occupied and couldn't be blocked. Adrian's smile turned chilly. Then move him. Surely you can accommodate one of your most distinguished passengers. From 2 rows away, Malcolm caught Sophia's glance, half request for guidance, half warning. He rose and approached. "Your Highness," Malcolm said evenly, "we're honored to have you aboard. But all passengers in first class are equally entitled to their seats. We can't reassign someone without cause." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "And you are Malcolm Pierce," he said simply. "I own a controlling interest in Aureus Air, and I support my crew in following our service commitments." A slow murmur passed through the nearby seats. Adrian regarded him for a moment, then gave a faint, dismissive shrug. "Very well. But you might reconsider what distinguished means in your line of work." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Distinction, in my experience, is in how we treat others, not in how they treat us." He stepped back, letting Sophia resume her work. Adrian said nothing further. In the galley, later, Sophia whispered, "Thank you. That could have gone sideways fast." "That's why we're here," Malcolm replied. The remainder of the flight passed without major incident until the final hour. As the cabin prepared for descent, Helen Draycott again found herself interacting with Ao Adekunle. This time, she asked to see his immigration form. When he explained he had already submitted it electronically, she insisted he produce a paper copy just to be sure. The tension was immediate. The journalist in the next seat leaned slightly to catch the exchange. Pen poised over his notepad. Malcolm was out of his seat before Helen could repeat herself. "Helen," he said quietly but firmly, "step into the galley with me." She followed reluctantly. "You've had your warning," he said. "Twice now. You've singled out the same passenger without cause. That's not caution, it's bias, and it's unacceptable." Her chin lifted. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Malcolm said. "You're doing your old job. The new one requires that you treat every passenger as if their dignity is worth the same as anyone else's. If that's a problem, tell me now." For a moment, he thought she might push back, but she only muttered, "Understood," and returned to the cabin. When they landed at JFK, the experience flight was declared a success by most measures. Guests praised the service, journalists noted a visible shift in atmosphere, and Prince Adrian even shook Malcolm's hand before disembarking, though his smile was still thin. But Malcolm knew the flight had been a close call. Without his direct intervention, 2 incidents could have undermined everything they were trying to build. As he stepped into the terminal, Andre joined him. "We passed," Andre said, barely, "but we passed." Malcolm nodded. "Now we move faster, because the resistance isn't slowing down." Andre grinned. "Then let's make sure they can't catch their breath." 2 weeks after the experience flight, Malcolm Pierce was back in the air, this time on a routine transatlantic run from New York to London, or at least that's what it looked like on the schedule. In reality, Malcolm knew something was brewing. The leaked memo from the stay, the Course faction hadn't gone quiet. Instead, whispers had turned into planning. And Andre Whitman's sources suggested that some of the resistant crew were waiting for the perfect chance to make the new passenger first standard look like an operational disaster. Andre had been blunt over coffee that morning. They can't attack you head on, so they'll try to create a situation where following the new rules causes chaos. Then they'll say, "See, this is why the old way worked." Malcolm had simply replied, "Then let them try." Boarding for Flight 228 was brisk but smooth. Sophia Alvarez was again in the lead for first class, her calm authority setting the tone. But Helen Draycott was there too, assigned at the last minute to replace a sick colleague. When Malcolm saw her name on the crew list, he knew this flight would be anything but ordinary. The cabin filled quickly, business leaders, diplomats, and a few celebrities. Among them was a well-known film director traveling with a service dog, a middle-aged couple from São Paulo celebrating their anniversary, and a quiet, sharply dressed young man with a Japanese passport and no checked luggage. It started during the meal service, somewhere over Newfoundland. Helen approached the young Japanese passenger seat 2C, asking to see his boarding pass again. When he produced it without fuss, she gave a tight smile and returned to the galley. Minutes later, she was back, this time asking to confirm his connecting flight in London. Sophia intercepted her. "Helen, is there a problem just verifying details?" Helen said lightly. "You can never be too careful." From his seat, Malcolm was already watching. He could feel the deliberate pacing of Helen's moves, slow, deliberate, visible enough to draw attention from nearby passengers, including the journalist 2 rows back who had already started jotting notes. A few minutes later, Helen's voice rose just enough to carry. "Sir, I'm going to need to check with security about your documentation. Please wait here." The young man looked puzzled but nodded. The air around them shifted. Passengers turned, murmured. Malcolm stood. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying weight. Helen's tone was practiced, neutral, possible irregularity with this passenger's travel documents. "Standard procedure to verify." "Standard procedure," Malcolm said evenly, "does not involve twice singling out a passenger without a specific trigger. What exactly is the irregularity?" Helen hesitated. "It's a mismatch," and the passenger reached into his briefcase and handed Malcolm a document. Malcolm glanced at it, then looked at Helen. "This is a diplomatic passport." Several passengers inhaled sharply. Helen's face stayed composed, but the faintest flush crept up her neck. Malcolm turned to the passenger. "I apologize for the interruption, sir. Please be assured there will be no further delays in your journey." The young man inclined his head politely. "Thank you. I understand these things can happen," but Malcolm knew they weren't just happening. This had been deliberate. As he returned to his seat, Andre, who was traveling incognito in business class, caught his eye from across the aisle and gave a subtle nod. It was time to change tactics. When the meal service ended, Malcolm made his way to the galley where Helen was tidying trays. "We're having a conversation when we land," he said quietly. Helen's eyes didn't waver. "Of course, Mr. Pierce." 3 hours later, as the plane descended over the English coast, Malcolm was ready. As soon as they landed and passengers began to disembark, he asked the diplomatic passenger to wait in the lounge for a brief meeting. The man agreed without hesitation. In a small private conference room at Heathrow, Malcolm sat across from Helen, with Andre and the passenger present. "This," Malcolm began, sliding the passenger's passport onto the table, "is not a security issue. This is a bias issue, and it ends now." Helen's hands folded neatly in her lap. "I was following my training." "No," Malcolm said, "you were following your habit, and your habit is to decide, based on appearance and who deserves extra scrutiny. That habit is why you will not be assigned to any premium cabin service until you complete retraining." Helen's gaze flicked to Andre, then back to Malcolm. "You can't sideline me for doing my job. I can when you redefine your job to suit your prejudices," Malcolm replied. "And for the record, this passenger is a representative of the Japanese Ministry of Trade. If you checked before approaching him, you'd have known." The young man spoke for the first time. "I have traveled extensively. This is the first time my credentials were questioned twice in the same flight. I'm not offended so much as I am concerned. If this happens to me, it happens to others who do not have my privilege to speak openly." His words landed with precision. Helen's composure slipped just enough for Malcolm to see it. "This isn't just about you," Malcolm said to her. "It's about what you represent when you wear that uniform, and right now, you're representing the very thing this airline has to leave behind." Helen didn't answer. Andre gathered the documents. "We'll arrange your retraining schedule," he told her. "Until then, you're grounded from passenger-facing duties." After Helen left, the diplomat looked at Malcolm. "You have a difficult job." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Worth doing, though." That evening, the story still made its way into the press. The journalist in 4A had seen the incident and, after confirming details with the diplomat, wrote a piece titled "Airline CEO Confronts Bias in Midair." The article described Malcolm's intervention in calm, precise language, and it went viral overnight. The irony was sharp. The attempted trap had turned into a showcase for the very reforms it was meant to undermine. In his office the next morning, Douglas Keating called with a rare tone of admiration. "You turned that around. I don't know how." "But you did," Malcolm replied. "We didn't turn it around. We just showed the truth in real time." Andre, standing by the window, grinned. "If they keep setting traps like that, we might just build the new culture faster than we planned." Malcolm's gaze was steady. "Let's hope they realize sooner rather than later that they're helping us more than hurting us." 3 days after the trap incident made headlines, the ripple effects were still moving through Aureus air like turbulence no one could predict. In break rooms, on crew buses, and in late-night phone calls between staff. The conversation wasn't just about the Japanese diplomat, it was about what the incident represented. Douglas Keating called Malcolm Pierce into his office. The CEO's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried weight. "We've scheduled a staff forum for Friday. Everyone from senior crew to new hires will be watching live stream. Multiple hubs. You'll be taking questions. Expect heat." Malcolm nodded. "Good. If they have grievances, I'd rather hear them out loud than watch them work in the shadows." Andre Whitman, who had been leaning against the wall, crossed his arms. You realize Helen's allies will be there. They'll come loaded with their best shots, hoping to catch you off balance. Then we don't dodge, Malcolm said. We answer. The forum was set in the airline's largest training auditorium, a tiered room with 3 massive screens and seating for 200. Rows of chairs filled quickly that morning, the hum of conversations mixing with the faint buzz of overhead lights. Across the screens, Aureus Air's logo faded in and out, alternating with the words Passenger First Standard. Open Forum. When Malcolm walked in, the noise dropped several decibels. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt and a navy blazer, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs. The look was deliberate, professional, but approachable. He took his seat on the stage between Douglas and the moderator, a veteran HR director named Linda Chen. Linda opened with a few prepared remarks about shared goals and continuous improvement. Then she looked at Malcolm. Mr. Pierce, before we take questions, would you like to say a few words? Malcolm stood, hands lightly clasped in front of him. You've all heard about the incident last week. You've read the headlines. What you may not know is how many passengers wrote to me afterward, not just the diplomat involved, but people who saw it unfold. They didn't write about politics or procedure. They wrote about dignity. They wanted to believe their airline was capable of protecting it. And that's why we're here. A few heads nodded. A few arms crossed tighter. Linda gestured toward the audience. Let's open the floor. The first question came from a young flight attendant in the 3rd row. Mr. Pierce, some of us feel like the new standards assume we've been treating passengers badly for years. What do you say to that? Malcolm's answer was steady. I don't assume that. I know many of you have given your best to this airline every day, but I also know there have been patterns that hurt passengers and, in the long run, hurt us as a company. If we ignore them, we repeat them. The next question was less polite. A tall, broad-shouldered man in the back stood up, one of the senior attendants Andre had identified as part of Helen's circle. With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, these so-called reforms slow us down. You're telling us to second-guess our instincts, and in this job, hesitation can mean safety risks. Malcolm let the words settle before answering. Safety will always be the top priority, but I'll challenge the idea that bias and safety are the same thing. They're not. Your instincts are important, but they're shaped by your experiences. And sometimes, those experiences teach you the wrong lessons. A murmur passed through the room. Halfway through the forum, Helen Draycott herself stood. She wore her uniform like armor. Mr. Pierce, you've made me the face of everything you say is wrong with our culture, but you don't see the things we see: the forged tickets, the unruly passengers, the times when a quick judgment call keeps a flight from going south. Are you willing to admit that you've undermined crew authority? The question was sharp, but Malcolm didn't flinch. I'm not undermining authority. I'm redefining it. Authority doesn't mean unchecked power to decide who belongs and who doesn't, based on appearance or assumptions. Authority means you have the training and judgment to apply the rules consistently and with respect. Helen's eyes narrowed, and if we disagree with your definition, Malcolm's tone stayed calm, but the undercurrent was steel. Then you'll need to decide if Aureus Air is still the right place for you, because this is the standard now. It's not a suggestion. The silence after that was heavy. Even Douglas glanced sideways at Malcolm, as if gauging the weight of the words. From the front row, Sophia Alvarez raised her hand. I just want to say something. I was there when the passenger first standard was applied under real pressure. It worked. It didn't compromise safety, and it diffused a situation that could have escalated. That's the point. We're not replacing safety with politeness. We're making them work together. A ripple of agreement moved through part of the room. Others stayed stony-faced. The moderator took more questions, some challenging, some supportive. One crew member from a long-haul route to South America said the reforms had made her more aware of small habits she didn't realize could feel exclusionary. Another complained that the extra steps were window dressing for management to look good in the press. Malcolm responded to each with the same balance of candor and composure. When the hour mark came, Linda announced they had time for one last question. A maintenance supervisor in the back stood. "Mr. Pierce, all this talk about passengers, what about us? What about the way crew are treated by the company? Are we going to see changes there too?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "Yes, because respect works in both directions. The passenger first standard is a framework for how we treat everyone: passengers, crew, maintenance, ground staff. If we don't live it internally, we can't expect it to hold in the cabin." That drew the first genuine applause of the morning. It wasn't unanimous, but it was strong enough to feel like a shift. When the forum ended, people lingered in the aisles. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Helen left quickly, her shoulders stiff. Sophia stayed behind, chatting with a few younger attendants who had been silent during the Q&A. In the hallway, Andre joined Malcolm. "You just told an entire workforce that the culture's changing whether they like it or not. That's not going to sit easy. It's not supposed to," Malcolm said, "but the ones who stay will be the ones who can carry it forward." That afternoon, video clips from the forum began circulating on social media. The exchange with Helen was shared the most, some calling Malcolm decisive, others calling him heavy-handed. But even among critics, there was no denying the clarity of his stance. By evening, Douglas sent Malcolm a brief message. "You just made the line in the sand visible to everyone." Malcolm replied with 2 words: "About time." The rain over London came in slanted sheets, hammering the glass of the private terminal as if trying to keep Flight 903 from leaving. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of jet fuel and fresh coffee. Malcolm Pierce stood near the large windows, scanning the tarmac where the sleek Aureus Air A350 gleamed under floodlights. This wasn't just another flight. It was the last test before the full rollout of the passenger first standard. The passenger list was daunting: government officials, celebrity influencers, high-profile investors. Every major media outlet had someone on board. And at the center of it all, seated in the forward cabin, was Senator Victoria Dane, chair of the National Transportation Oversight Committee. Her opinion could shape federal policy for years. Andre Whitman approached, holding a tablet, crew list, final manifest, and you might want to sit down before you read who's in charge of service in first class. Malcolm took the tablet. The name leapt out instantly. Helen Draycott. "She's back." Andre nodded, completed her retraining. Keaton insisted she be given a chance to work under the new standard in a high-profile situation. His words, not mine. Malcolm exhaled slowly. "Then this is either going to prove she can adapt or blow up in our faces." Boarding began smoothly. Cameras clicked, and reporters streamed short clips of the premium cabin's polished welcome. Helen's smile was fixed in place, her voice even, her movements precise. Sofia Alvarez was also in first class, moving with her usual quiet authority, balancing service and watchfulness. The first sign of trouble came halfway through the flight, somewhere over the North Atlantic. A tech billionaire, one of the airline's key investors, was seated next to Senator Dane. He had been drinking steadily since takeoff and was growing louder, leaning across the senator's space to make points about government overreach in the aviation industry. Helen approached. Her tone clipped. "Sir, I'll need you to lower your voice and keep to your own seat space." The billionaire smirked. "Relax. I'm just talking to my friend here." Senator Dane's jaw tightened. "We've met once, briefly, at a fundraiser." Helen repeated her request. This time, the man leaned back but added, "Funny. I've flown Orias for years and nobody's ever told me to be quiet before." The tension drew glances from across the cabin. Sofia moved closer, ready to step in. But Helen waved her off. "I've got it." A few minutes later, Helen returned, this time holding a printed notice. "Sir, if you continue to disrupt other passengers, we'll have to log the incident and notify authorities upon landing." The billionaire laughed. "You've got to be kidding. You know who I am." Helen's voice sharpened. "We apply the same rules to everyone." The sentence was correct. The delivery was not. Her tone carried a faint edge, the kind that passengers, especially influential ones, remember for all the wrong reasons. From his seat, 3 rows back, Malcolm rose. The cameras from 2 nearby journalists swung toward him instinctively. "Helen," he said evenly, "let me handle this." Her expression flickered. Was it relief or defiance before she stepped aside? Malcolm crouched slightly to meet the billionaire's eyes without looming. "Sir, our goal here is simple, a comfortable, respectful flight for everyone. I'm asking for your cooperation so we can keep that standard for you and for the senator." The man studied him for a long beat, then gave a theatrical sigh. "Fine. I'll behave. But only because you asked nicely." Malcolm smiled faintly. "That works for me." He returned to his seat, aware of Helen's gaze following him. For a while, the cabin settled. But near the final third of the flight, as the lights dimmed and most passengers slept, a different kind of test arrived. A young woman in 2B pressed the call button, her voice low when Sofia came over. "I think the man next to me is filming me on his phone." Sofia glanced discreetly. The man in 2A had the phone angled oddly, his thumb moving as if tapping record. She excused herself and returned with Helen, explaining the situation quietly. Helen's response was brisk. "If he's doing that, it's a violation of our policy. I'll deal with it." She strode to 2A. "Sir, are you recording the passenger next to you?" The man blinked, caught off guard. "No, I was texting my wife." Helen held out her hand. "May I see your phone?" He hesitated. "That's private. It becomes our concern when another passenger's comfort and safety are involved," Helen said, voice tightening. The exchange was drawing attention now. A camera phone in 3C began recording. Malcolm stepped in again. "Let's move this to the galley," he suggested. In the galley, the passenger reluctantly showed his phone, no videos, just a text thread. Helen's posture softened slightly, but her face flushed. Malcolm looked at her. The concern was valid. The approach needs adjusting. Public confrontations escalate fast, especially with cameras around. Helen didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, it was quieter. "I thought I was following the standard." "You were," Malcolm said, "but how we follow it matters as much as the fact that we do." They returned to the cabin. Sophia reassured the young woman in 2B, who nodded in understanding. The man in 2A kept to himself for the rest of the flight. As the aircraft descended toward JFK, Malcolm knew the day's events would be dissected from every angle by crew, by passengers, by media. Some would see Helen's actions as proof the culture was shifting. Others would see them as clumsy, maybe even dangerous. When the seatbelt sign went off at the gate, passengers rose, collecting bags, trading polite goodbyes. Senator Dane paused by Malcolm's seat. "I've been on a lot of flights. Mr. Pierce, I've seen crews look the other way to avoid a scene. That didn't happen today." "Thank you, Senator," Malcolm said. "We're still working on how to make it look as good as it works." She smiled faintly. "Keep at it. Culture change is like turning a ship. It happens slowly, then all at once." After the passengers disembarked, Malcolm met with the crew in the empty cabin. "We handled challenges today without backing down from the standard, but we also saw where the approach can improve. That's what growth looks like." Helen's eyes met his for a brief moment. This time, there was no defiance, just a flicker of understanding. Andre, standing by the galley, caught Malcolm's eye and gave the smallest nod. The hardest part wasn't convincing the passengers anymore. It was earning the crew's trust in a vision that still felt new and, to some, uncomfortably different. Malcolm knew the work wasn't finished, but as he stepped off the jet bridge into the humid New York night, he felt something shift, small but real. The morning after Flight 903, the Aureus Air Headquarters buzzed with the low, electric hum of a company that had been on the front page for too many days in a row. News outlets replayed footage from the mid-air incidents, Helen confronting the billionaire, Malcolm diffusing it, the galley conversation over the alleged filming. The public reaction was split. Some hailed the airline's new standards. Others accused it of policing passengers too aggressively. Malcolm Pierce read the coverage in his office with the calm detachment of a man used to storms. But he also knew public sentiment could tilt with the wind, and too many bad headlines could undo months of work. A knock at his door pulled him from the screen. It was Sophia Alvarez, holding a slim folder. "She asked me to give you this," Sophia said. Inside was a handwritten letter from Helen Draycott. The handwriting was steady, the words deliberate. "Mr. Pierce, I've been with this airline for 27 years. I thought I knew what it meant to serve passengers well. I see now that I'd confused authority with control and fairness with convenience. You've given me more chances than most would. I don't know if I can change completely, but I want to try, if you're willing. I'd like to show you what that looks like in practice, not in a training room, but on the line. Helen." Malcolm read it twice. "Where is she now?" Sophia hesitated. "Scheduled for Flight 224 to Chicago this afternoon. She said if you wanted to see her in action, she'd understand." By midday, Malcolm was on the manifest for 224, seated in 3A of first class. Helen didn't react when she saw him, if anything. Her smile was quieter, her welcome more measured. The flight began without incident. Passengers settled in with newspapers and headphones, the hum of the engines steady in the background. Malcolm watched Helen, not scrutinizing, but observing the subtler things, how she spoke to a nervous first-time flyer, how she offered options without rushing, how she listened before answering. 2 hours in, a moment came that could have gone either way. An older passenger with limited English was struggling to make a meal choice. The man's frustration began to show, and a younger passenger nearby muttered, "This is holding everything up." Helen knelt beside the older man's seat, smiling warmly. She gestured to the menu, pointing to pictures, then to herself, miming eating, making it a shared choice rather than a transaction. The man's face lit up when he recognized one of the dishes. Helen repeated the order back gently, then moved on. No raised voices, no public embarrassment, just quiet resolution. Malcolm caught Sophia's glance from across the aisle. She'd seen it too, later, when a small turbulence pocket jostled the cabin and spilled a drink onto a passenger's lap. Helen was there instantly, not with blame or instructions, but with an apology and a fresh towel. Kneeling to dab the seat herself before offering to find a change of clothes from onboard supplies. It wasn't perfect. She still moved briskly, sometimes too briskly for nervous passengers, but there was a patience in her now, a willingness to pause that hadn't been there before. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Helen approached Malcolm's seat. "I wasn't sure you'd take me up on the invitation. I wasn't sure you meant it," Malcolm replied. She gave a small shrug. "I don't know what happens from here. I'm not suddenly a different person, but I can be a better one than I was." "That's the work," Malcolm said. "Not changing overnight, just changing." The landing was smooth. Passengers gathered their things, thanking the crew as they left. The older man from earlier paused to shake Helen's hand, saying something in his native language that made her laugh softly. In the quiet, after the last passenger disembarked, Malcolm stood by the forward door. "You did well today," he told her. Helen's smile was modest. "I did my job." "You did more than that," Malcolm said. "You showed what the standard looks like when it's lived, not enforced." Andre met them on the jet bridge, having flown in on another route. So, worth keeping her in first-class rotation? Malcolm glanced at Helen. "I think she's earned the chance to prove this isn't just one good day." Helen didn't say thank you, but the slight nod she gave was more than enough. That evening, Malcolm sat in his office with the city lights stretching beyond the glass. He thought about all the flights, all the confrontations, all the people, passengers, and crew whose paths had crossed his during this turbulent year. The fight to change a culture wasn't glamorous. It was made of 1,000 small moments, most of them unseen. His phone buzzed with a message from Senator Victoria Dane saw the Chicago rotation report. "Impressive work from your team. Keep turning that ship." Malcolm smiled. For the first time in months, the horizon looked just a little clearer. The next morning, he sent a short memo to all Aureus Air employees. Standards don't live in manuals. They live in moments when we choose dignity over convenience, listening over assumption, patience over pride. Every flight, every passenger, every crew member is a chance to get it right. Let's keep getting it right. He signed it simply Malcolm Pierce. And somewhere on a crew bus heading to the airport, Helen Draycott read the memo on her phone, glanced out the window, and thought, maybe we can. And so, the flight landed. Passengers went their separate ways. But the ripples of what happened on board the quiet acts of courage, the uncomfortable truths, the willingness to change they kept moving. What Malcolm Pierce proved wasn't that he owned half an airline. It was that true leadership isn't measured in titles or balance sheets. It's measured in the moments you choose respect over power, humanity over habit. Helen Draycott's journey reminded us of something else, that even those who have been part of the problem can choose to become part of the solution. Change is rarely loud, and it's never easy. But it starts when someone decides the way things have always been isn't the way they have to be. Discrimination, in any form, corrodes more than reputations. It erodes trust, dignity, and the very heart of who we are as people. Stories like this aren't just meant to inspire, they're meant to remind us that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of consent. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, like it. And if you want more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate humanity, subscribe and join us for the next flight.